Hi there. I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of things we've done over the past 2 years. Defiant's been around for a couple of years now. However, none of this comes from a perspective of kind of giving instructions on what I think anybody else should do. Really, I'm just going to tell you how we've done things, what's worked for us, what hasn't worked for us, and let you take your own lessons from that. For me, I came from a background in console game development. I've been in game development for a bit over a decade now, 12, 13 years now. I've worked for Irrational Games, I've worked for Relic, I've worked for Pandemic Studios, and I've worked in Australia, Canada, the States, and then back in Australia to work at Pandemic. I was working at Pandemic when Pandemic closed in Australia, and it was from that we founded Defiant Development. Defiant Development was established with a core group of the ex-pandemic people, and it's been entirely bootstrapped. And we set ourselves up with the intention, to be honest, we set ourselves up with the intention of setting up in an office and making games because that's how we knew what to do. But also with a very broad remit to do what we thought was interesting. So we only had two things that we considered to be uncompromising goals with Defiant. One of those was we wanted to do whatever we did really well. We didn't want to make bad games. And I'll say that that's at least in part reactionary to what had happened in the Australian industry. Australia's lost about 500 games jobs in the last 3-4 years, and they've lost them for a combination of reasons, but the biggest reason is that the Australian dollar's gone up, and Australia used to be a work-for-hire territory. So we were considered cheap labour, English-speaking cheap labour, so that's where a bunch of games work went. That's probably something that's applicable to certain parts of this region as well, and I think that if you make high-quality games, there's always a market, because high-quality games make exponentially more money than is put into them. The returns are potentially huge. If you're doing work for hire, you're doing it on margins. And as soon as the dollar changes, the margins slip and everything's over. And that's very much what happened in Australia. So our number one goal was only make good stuff, because as soon as you make bad stuff, you've got a reputation for making bad stuff. And that's a very, very hard reputation to come back from. You can count the number of AAA studios that have made really shitty games in their past on one hand. It's not a common scenario. So we didn't want to get into that situation. And the second one was to find a home for talent. You know, Australia had, at that point in time, 400 professional game developers sitting around looking for things to do. We thought that that was a huge opportunity, and that effectively was an enormous natural resource going untapped. And we thought we could make that work. In those 2 years, we've released a number of games. We released Rocket Bunnies, which I'm going to talk about in a little more detail. We released Warco, which was a proof of concept pitch that we took around to console manufacturers for a game, first-person shooter about war journalism. So a first-person shooter where you shoot footage, not people. And that project we actually developed in partnership with a local film director and a journalist. It got a lot of interest, it got a lot of traction, but it didn't get any traction from publishers. And to be honest, that's because it was a really silly pitch. Because we were trying to pitch it as potentially a AAA console title. It's late in the console cycle. We didn't have a proven background, at least as Defiant, as a console developer, although of course we did. Everybody there had been involved in that sort of work. We're only really a dozen people. It was well outside the scope, and for various reasons that's what we had to go after. We've since revised that idea down to something that makes a lot more sense as a downloadable game for places like Steam, and hopefully that will see the light of day. We also did augmented reality work, and this comes back to what I said about how we set up, which is we set up with a broad kind of mission to go after things that were interesting for us. And we were doing a little bit of work on a work-for-hire project, and saw some augmented reality demonstrations and thought that's really neat, and tried to build our own AR rig in the office. We were thinking maybe architectural visualization would be an interesting place to go, so we were trying to strap accelerometers and Dead Reckoning pointers to a laptop and do all sorts of stuff. And in the end, what we found with AR is that it's not quite there yet. But we made a game for the Qualcomm augmented reality competition, which came in at second place, got us a bit of profile, and we realised that there are people doing kind of gimmicky stuff in AR, but there's not really anybody who knows games there. So that's become a very good space for us, and that's where we've done the work for hire work that's helped us fund the studio to keep working on the projects that we're interested in, that we think will have high return. And that comes round to where we are now. We published Ski Safari on April 26th. We did about 500,000 units in about 3 weeks. I know figures are always good, so there's some hard numbers that you can take. When we were doing 40,000 units a day, that was number 3 in the paid and about 30th in the grossing. When we were doing 20k units a day, we were about number 6 in the paid, about number 50 in the grossing. So that gives you a sense. I do know that the current numbers are considered to be down on earlier in the year. Apple's cracked down on some various elements. And I think that was probably good for us from the perspective of getting us visibility. It cut away some of the people who were buying their way up the charts. Hero's Call, which is our Diablo-style action RPG, is in submission right now and will be releasing shortly. And I'll talk a little bit about that and a little bit about how that came to be shortly after that. I'm just going to show a quick video of Ski Safari, which hopefully I can make this work. It looks like I may only... I'll show you up to where it loads to. So yeah, this is Ski Safari, which has done very well for us, and this is a casual endless runner, a la Jetpack Joyride. So Ski Safari was the result of a couple of the guys who were working for Defiant, Sean and Brendan, and them kind of building on the passion for the sorts of games they were keen to see. And it really evolves on a lot of the lessons we learned during making Rocket Bunnies. There's a whole bunch of different animals that you can ride on as you go along. There's a whole bunch of different missions and challenges, a la Jetpack Joyride, and it really has been polished to a mirror gleam. If you haven't played it yet, it's available in the App Store for 99 cents, and you should, because we're starting to slide down the charts. So go out and grab that. I'll switch back. So a lot of the reasons that Ski Safari was a success, and a lot of the reasons that we've done what we've done now, come back to Rocket Bunnies, which was our first real entry into the mobile market. Rocket Bunnies was incredibly educational for us, but not incredibly profitable. And it reached a really wide audience. We launched onto Android first, and we did this about a year ago. We were one of the first games to come out with a high degree of quality and polish that led on to Android. We got a huge amount of support from the Android sites and the Android fan base, and we were free because we heard that's what worked on Android. Somebody told us that Angry Birds was making an incredible amount of money from advertising every month, and we thought that sounded great. So we decided to try that market. I will say that we got to about 500,000 installs in a little over a month, so it did very healthily for us. We had a lot of sessions, and running the numbers, we must have been on a different ad budget than Angry Birds, because I think they were making $1 million a month, and maybe we made $9 million. Maybe more on a good day, but not a lot more. So one of the interesting things about Rocket Bunnies, and one of the things that we get a lot of feedback on, is actually it's a hardcore timing-based game dressed up in casual dress. So it looks like a casual game. It's cute and fluffy like Ski Safari is, but in actual fact, it's a much more hardcore game. So from all of these things, we took that and we brought Rocket Bunnies to iOS, where it did, again, okay at 99 cents, didn't set the world on fire for much the same reasons. Again, got very high ratings. The people who loved it really loved it, but it wasn't a breakout. So Ski Safari is an example of all the things we learned there. Ski Safari really is very much a casual game in casual clothing. Brendan put together a series of prototypes of gameplay, of things that he thought were interesting, and this is the one that Sean picked up, even when it was just like a simple line and a little guy on it, and you could play, and there were no challenges, there was no nothing, but it was interesting and it was fun and it was rewarding to play. So the core mechanic was fun from day one. That's the one Sean got excited about, started drawing pictures, started putting the art together. The art matched the casualness of the gameplay, and in a lot of ways Brendan, who's the programmer who worked on this, is a hardcore gamer. That's what he likes. Rocket Bunnies is a game he made for him, and the art style Sean effectively was making for his kids. So that combination didn't really work, but this time Brendan was making a game for the mass market, and that really worked. The game was finished in November and kind of heading towards a Christmas push. I have that November build now, and what's most interesting about it is every single feature of the game is present. So the game as it exists today and the game as it existed in November are identical, except the game in November is rubbish compared to the game today. And that's all elements of polish. That's how fast the player rotates. That's what happens when you crash and where we're favourable to the player. That's how we measure an objective and how we give you a long leash to work with. So all of it's literally being put into people's hands and being polished constantly from that November period. Now we've got Heroes Call, which is just about to release. And Heroes Call is the opposite side of that coin. Heroes Call is a Diablo-style game. It's a core game dressed in core clothing. And we've taken the approach that we're a 12-person team, so we can make games that two people working together in a back room can't. And that's our strength, and that's what we want to lean on. So what we're trying to build here is a best-in-class game in an emerging market. And the reason to go to an emerging market is because we're also fast. You know, we're independent, we're wholly owned, we don't have to go through green light. I've worked at EA and we can ship a game in the time it takes to go through EA's approval process. And we know that. So this is our chance to move out ahead of where the other guys are. So free to play, tablet, mobile, core game in the Diablo genre, coming out in a week. And that's playing to our strengths, which are, you know, the speed we can move at and the amount of polish we can bring to a game. I was going to show you a video for this, but I've messed something up, and it won't play MP4s here, so I won't, but I will say if you come by, I'll show it to you on the iPad later. So this leads to a couple of questions, because we're not really normal in a lot of ways, and one of those is, you know, how do we end up with such a wide scope of stuff we're working on? How do we keep the wheels turning? Like, how do we keep revenues coming in when it's really taken us 2 years to crack a profitable game? And how do we work inside the local indie community? And the other question is, you know, these are the goals that kind of lead into those outputs that I talked about. You know, when we set up, we wanted to harness the local talent, we wanted to make only good things, we wanted to make sure that we had space to learn. Whenever I speak to indies, the number one thing I say is make sure you've got enough runway to ship 3 games, because you learn so much from shipping the first one that you can then apply to the second one, and then you can then apply to the third one. When I worked at Relic was best in class in RTS. They knew RTSs, they knew how to do them, and I observed as they moved into different RTSs how quickly they could build on their previous experience and how much difference that made. And I've seen it happen time and time again when companies move out of their comfort zone and go to a genre that they don't understand. It can be really expensive and a real stumbling block. But you don't get to do any of that unless you've got enough runway to make 2 or 3 games. The Voxel agents in Australia is another great example. Their first game, Dolphin Hero, is rubbish, just a turd. But it was them just getting one game out fast, so they knew what the process was, they knew what they were doing, they knew all the different steps in the pipeline. And Train Conductor and Train Conductor 2 have done really well for them. And most of all, we wanted to keep talent close. We didn't want to lose people overseas, we didn't want to lose people to other studios, we didn't want to lose people to doing work that they didn't enjoy. You know, pretty much everybody gets into game development because that's what they're passionate about, and we wanted to try and keep that passion close. Before Defiant, we tried to put together a group of 7 people to build a really ambitious XBLA game that was way too widely scoped for what we were doing. We weren't going to pay anybody, and every one of the 7 would have an equal cut of the company. We realised really quickly that meant that it was impossible to make a decision, and that people didn't really work when they didn't get paid. So paying a fair wage for fair work is one of the things that, when we set up Defiant, if people do work, they get paid. You know, we pay a good market rate. We have people working on projects. They own what they build. And also, because we'd all worked at big studios, at the EAs, the Pandemics, the Ubisofts of the world, we'd all signed employment contracts in the past that said that the company owned everything we did. You know, from waking up in the morning to going to sleep in the evening, they own everything. And I've always thought that was a really shitty policy. So I wanted to prove that that's not necessary, and we wanted to make sure that people had the opportunity to work on side projects and to do it with, with our support. They could work on side projects, they could bring them in, they could get them play tested, they could work with everybody, and that kind of leads to what our model is. We do contract work that funds our own projects, that funds our own pushes into new spaces, and for anybody who's doing contract work, I really recommend that you find a niche that you can work in. Augmented reality has been very good for us because we can be best in class there, we can do good work, we can do good returns for people. And I'll also say the other thing for anybody who's considering contract work is our universal policy is the first thing we ask people is what constitutes a win for you? Because we are only interested when we can help get the person we're working with a win. And sometimes that person's working inside a big company and has been told, call a game developer, get a game made. But they have no idea what would constitute success. If that is the case, and if you can't get a clear answer to what's success for you, run. Because if you can't get success for your customers, you can't make your customers happy, and there's no point doing that work. So we only do like win-win-win stuff. We offer free office space as an incubator and advice and playtesting for local developments. We try and show up at all the local developer events. We're super active in terms of keeping these people around. And the reason for that is because we would rather the talent is close and working on their own stuff and helping with that process as much as possible, because it lets us scale. If a project comes in, or if we're working on something that gets big, we know there's experienced programmers that we can turn around to and say, hey, can you help us out with this? Would you be interested in doing a couple of months' work on this project? And that works incredibly well for us. It also means that there's a vibrant hub going on. And the success here for us is that Ski Safari isn't the project that we were funding, and it's not a project we own. It's a project that's owned by Brendan and Sean, the programmer and artist that I was talking about earlier, who were doing paid work for us at the time and working on Ski Safari in their free time. It's a project they brought in that we play tested and hammered on and helped make good. And when the time came, they asked us to publish it because we've got that experience and that reach, and that worked well. But even if they'd taken it somewhere else to publish and we got no interest out of it other than helping them out, that would still be a win. Because money running into the Australian development community, success for people, this is good. This can only be a win. And I think that's where we look at things slightly differently to the way that some of the big publicly traded companies do, in that they'd rather people did nothing and were fully owned. We'd rather people succeed as much as possible. But it has been a huge success because it gained us profile, it gives us huge visibility, it drives us to the launch of Heroes Call. It strengthens our relationships by having good games in the pipeline. It gives the owners additional freedom to keep doing things that please them, that hopefully, as the future goes on, that they'll also want to publish with us. And it gives additional revenue flowing into us that we can then invest in the other things we're working on. So, as a result, we're stronger working together, and we can make bigger bets and we can move into bigger spaces than we otherwise would. And that's really what Heroes Call is for us. So these are a couple of the high-level tips of things that have worked for us. For any developers who aren't located in the US, I really think pushing your local market hard is a big plus. You can get local coverage, you can talk to the local reporters, you can talk to the local indie scene, you can talk to local developers, and that activity can drive a bit of a local groundswell, and that can then flow on. Australia is very good for this because we're a decent sized market. I'm sure you've seen on the various pie charts over the course of the day that Australia probably blocks out as about a 3% of the global market, which makes it a nice, good test market to move out of. It's got very strong uptake on the Apple side, so that helps us get visibility in front of Apple. The Apple reps in that area are really good. But regardless of where you are, I think that, you know, trying to engage the local community as vibrantly and as enthusiastically as possible early on is a big plus. Get to gameplay as soon as possible, and this helps a great deal. You know, provide that 2 minutes of you know, awesome fun, and then build up around it, because it's really hard to retroactively make something fun. But when you've got something fun, it's much more straightforward to build the framework out around it, particularly if you've done that multiple times, which kind of plays into the next. I spoke about this earlier on, but the more runway you have, and the reason I say 3 games for indie studios as a must is because I believe almost every independent developer is going to blow out scope at some point or another. And as a result, if you plan for 3 games, you might get 2 out. And you need to get 2 out. That's the absolute critical key. And, you know, when it comes to building out a framework, we work in Unity. We use cheap assets from the Unity store. We try and build out a framework fast so that we can be representative really early on. The other thing is, when you find reference you like, sometimes it's easy to contact that specific artist, because, you know, our artists have got less broad ranges than you might find in a big studio. When you're working in EA, when you've got 30 people in your concept department, you can go down and you can say, I want something that looks a bit like, you know, kind of Ralph Bakshi era animation a la Wizards, go. And they can all work off that base. It's harder to do that with a smaller pool of artists. So when you find a reference piece you like, you can generally contact that artist directly and say, you know, would you like to bang out some icons for us, some maps, some screens? And we've had real success on that front. And yeah, that pretty much covers the first couple of years for us, where we are now and what we're planning to do in the future. Any questions? Yeah.
So I want to ask, are you trying to do ski safari in the freezing mode, or is it just going to get
I think that, look, one of the nice things about Ski Safari is we learned a lot from what Tiny Wings did. We learned a lot from what Jetpack Joyride did, and we brought a lot of that to play. We've got an update coming out which will add some things that we think are the tip of the iceberg for how we could be free to play on that model. And yeah, it's something we're seriously considering. Particularly because Heroes Call is a free-to-play game. That means that we'll have a good base of free-to-play users, and we're hoping we can use those to push over to Ski Safari. Getting that critical mass amongst the projects is something we're really keen on. But in the end, it's in Brendan and Sean's hand, but I'm definitely sure that's on their roadmap. So, yeah.
How do you manage your deadlines when it comes to working plan projects and building your own IP?
Yeah, I think that's probably the hardest thing to do. We're really good at working on contract work because you sit down, you work out a milestone schedule with the client. You make sure that you've got sign off on every milestone. And I say milestone schedule, we're generally talking about a 6-week to 8-week project with weekly or 2-weekly milestones. So there's not a lot of milestones there, but you know, we hit sign off at every point. We try and scope those right, and in some cases they blow out. We had one big one that blew out by 2.5 months really, which was a lot for us and made a big difference. But those projects are good because mostly they're to a very strict deadline. Everybody knows how much money's there, and our favourite project is when somebody's got an actual hard deadline in the world, like when we're doing an augmented reality for an art exhibition, and the art exhibition launches in 3 months. You know, we know we've got to be finished. Everybody knows we've got to be finished. People don't mess around. There's no, wouldn't it be nice if it did all these other things? You do it. And when you're working on your own IP, the temptation is always to give it another month, you know? Like, you don't have that hard deadline. until you run out of cash. And on Heroes Call, we've gone until we have so little cash in the bank that it makes no sense. We should have launched it in January, but we didn't. We've given in to the temptation, and that's something that, you know, is eye-opening for us. We can be really aggressive with external projects, but still, with our hearts in it, we tend to overscope, and that's, you know, a decade of experience on most of the people in the team, and we still blow out by, you know, anywhere between 20 and 30% on our own projects. So. Cheers. Thank you.